The moment I saw the castle, I knew we were in for a messy one. Not because it was ruined, ruins are common currency in the Imperium, but because it was too perfect. An ancient, Gothic monstrosity perched atop a black needle of rock, overlooking a planet called Carpathia Prime. It was a mandated feudal world, all dim moons, rolling mist, and population ruled by a single eccentric nobleman who was supposed to be a loyal imperial governor. His name was Count Dracula. They told us we were there to investigate a localized blood depletion plague. I suspected incompetence. I was proven spectacularly wrong. My unit, the Valhallan 102nd, were already miserable. Valhallans don't like misty, temperate planets. They like ice and fighting until their plasma guns overheat. Carpathia Prime was cold, yes, but it was a wet, suffocating cold, a place where the shadows felt thicker than the air. Dracula himself was a marvel of archaic aristocracy, tall, impeccably dressed in velvet and lace, ridiculous, frankly, and possessed of a charisma that seemed to physically drain the energy from the room. He welcomed us into his fortress, Castle Volkov, with a theatrical flourish and a chillingly smooth smile. He explained the plague away as localized anemia, a result of poor nutrition among the serfs. But the guardsmen's reports didn't match. They spoke of workers disappearing, of bodies found completely drained, and the persistent, unsettling fact that the governor's retinue, pale, silent figures in outdated clothing, never seemed to appear during the day cycle. And the requests, oh, the requests. The Count kept petitioning for increased blood tithes to the local Medicaid facility, claiming it was vital for plasma research. Pure, untainted blood, straight from the populace. I was suspicious, of course. My commissarial duty is to suspect everything, especially excessive politeness. But what truly set off the alarms wasn't the disappearing serfs, but the man's unnatural strength. We had a minor incident. A drunken guardsman, Private Yevgeny, stumbled into a restricted library and accidentally knocked over a bronze statue. It was immense. Before Yevgeny could even yelp, the Count, gliding from the shadows, caught the statue mid-fall with one hand, setting it down without a sound. Then he turned, and for a split second the polite mask slipped, and I saw something ancient, predatory, and terrifyingly powerful looking back at me. That night I led an unauthorized deep scan of the castle's foundations. We bypassed the old Imperial sensors and used geomantic probes. What we found wasn't just ancient stone. Below the main chapel, where the Count held his nightly sermons of fealty, was a vast subterranean vault, and it was packed with ornate iron sarcophagi, not relics of saints, but sleeping places. And nearby, a vast primitive warp engine, disguised as an ancient organ console. This wasn't just an eccentric lord. This was a monster trying to build a sanctuary. When I confronted him in the chapel the next morning, the sun was just beginning to touch the distant peaks. Dracula was standing before the altar, which was not adorned with an aquila, but a stylized bat sigil. "Commissar," he said, his voice retaining that maddening, silky calm, "you are meddling in affairs beyond your remit. This world is mine. I have sustained it, protected it, and I require its sustenance. You were meant to be a minor distraction." I told him that in the Imperium, everything belongs to the Emperor, including his decadent life. I drew my power sword. He didn't flinch. He simply smiled, showing teeth that were suddenly too long, too white. "Such predictable courage. You mistake me for one of your pitiful warp spawn. I predate your Emperor's dominion. I am a predator of the true night, Commissar." The battle began with his retinue. Those pale servants, they weren't human anymore. They moved with unnatural speed, claws replacing fingers. They swarmed the chapel. My Valhallans were good, disciplined fighters, but fighting something that moved faster than the eye could follow and didn't bleed when you shot it was a shock. I cut through 3 of them with my power sword, but Dracula himself was already moving towards the organ console, the warp engine. He wasn't trying to fight me. He was trying to escape the entire planet. He knew that Imperial attention, once focused, never wanes. He planned to use that antique warp drive to jump himself and his sarcophagi, his whole dynasty, into the deep warp, far from the light of the Astronomicon. As he slammed his hand onto the console, the entire chapel filled with a sickening, grinding sound and the smell of burnt ozone. The air turned purple. That act of defiance, that unsanctioned breach into the immaterium for purely selfish gain, was his fatal error. It wasn't the Emperor's administratum he angered, it was the warp itself. A tear, a jagged black line, appeared high in the ceiling of the chapel, and through that tear something began to manifest. It was too fast, too sudden for a normal demonic incursion. The fire came first. Not plasma fire, but ethereal blue-white flame that smelled of sulfur and burning hope. Then the figures. They didn't stride, they simply were. Black spectral power armor, their joints glowing with cold fire, their pauldrons bearing a flaming skull sigil. The Legion of the Damned. They are the Emperor's last terrible judgment, the phantom Astartes who materialize only when the damnation is absolute and total. They didn't even acknowledge the guardsmen. Their focus was singular, terrifyingly perfect. Dracula stopped his frantic work at the console and turned. For the first time, the ancient predator showed true, animal fear. His voice, stripped of its arrogance, was a strained whisper. No, the damned. Not for me. I am not chaos. He couldn't comprehend them. He was a monster of the mortal plane, a legend of old terror. But these were the avatars of divine retribution, utterly immune to his glamour and his fear-inducing aura. The battle instantly changed. My Valhallans and I were suddenly caught in the crossfire between 2 perfect predators. The Legion of the Damned, we called them the Firehawks, moved with preternatural precision, their bolters and flame weapons targeting only Dracula and the remaining vampires. Dracula, no longer subtle, transformed into a massive winged horror, a demonic approximation of a bat tearing through the air. He was immensely powerful. He ripped through the stone columns, creating whirlwinds of debris, trying to crush the Firehawks, but every strike passed through them like smoke. Their flaming armor was untouched. One of the phantoms, an officer wielding a flaming power sword, simply advanced toward the airborne count, its movements slow, deliberate, and utterly relentless. There was no rage in their attack, only the cold, mechanical process of justice. I directed my guardsmen to cease fire on the Legion, a command that felt profoundly wrong, and to focus on providing suppressive fire to keep Dracula contained within the chapel. We were essentially assisting a force that existed outside of all Imperial doctrine, simply because the alternative was letting an ancient evil escape to plague the galaxy. We were shields for ghosts. The end was inevitable. Dracula, maddened by the psychic presence of the incorporeal marines, tried to land a final, desperate bite on the nearest phantom. He lunged, fangs bared, aiming for the neck of the glowing power armor. The Firehawk didn't move. The Count's fangs simply hit the ceramite and shattered. The Astartes phantom then raised its flaming power sword and drove it, with terrifying casualness, straight through the Count's heart. There was a high-pitched, agonizing shriek, a sound of centuries of unholy life being instantly undone. Dracula dissolved, not into ash, but into a cloud of foul, dark smoke that was instantly consumed by the ethereal flames of the Legion. And then, as quickly as they arrived, they were gone. The warp tear sealed itself. The chapel was silent, save for the crackling of fire. My Valhallans were shaken, but alive. We didn't report the Legion of the Damned. We just reported a successful purge of a Xenos-tainted cult run by an eccentric governor, and signed the death warrant for the entire planet. Because sometimes, Commissar, when the forces of absolute good meet absolute evil, all that's left is a smoking crater. Now, I need a drink strong enough to forget the taste of ancient blood.